Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ASA Early Career Researcher Chapter Virtual Series panel on networking in isolation. My name is Sarah Martel. I am an associate professor at UNSW, and I was part of the steering committee for the ECR chapter for a number of years, which is how I wound up being involved in moderating this panel today. I'm really excited about this one because I have a lot of questions myself about how we're meant to meet people and build relationships if we can't actually meet people in person. And so I'm looking forward to this a lot. I will begin with a little bit of an introduction to what we're up to, and then I will basically, then I will deal with the speakers and the panelists and what's going on. So we begin with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the ASA ECR chapter acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. We also, as a part of the ASA, are operating underneath their code of conduct. So the ASA is committed to making ASA organized, sponsored, or supported meetings, events, and publications inclusive, productive, and enjoyable for everyone, regardless of age, caring responsibilities, cultural diversity, disability, gender, indigeneity, sexual orientation, gender identity, physical appearance, or religion. These things are important to us, that everyone has a place here and everyone is heard and valued in the professional community. If you have any concerns on any of these points, do let us know. And we will do our best to address those going forward. So today's panel is called Networking in Isolation. We have 4 panelists who I think will have great insights for us on how we're doing these things. The way that this works is I will ask each of them to give a brief introduction for themselves. I have a couple of sort of start-off questions that I'll ask all of the panelists, but really the main activity here comes from you, the participants, to pop into the chat and to put questions there as we go, as anything comes up, occurs to you as you have questions, just put them there and then we can sort of the moderators, so Ursula and Bernard and I will keep an eye on that, and we'll use that as a way to ask questions of the panelists as we go. So we will turn off the screen sharing. And now my screen is too big. I had all my windows perfectly arranged before another. Okay.
I'm exactly the same.
Yeah, so with that, I would like to hand over to our panelists. I'm going to begin with Mita Brierley. Would you please give us a bit of an introduction about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Mita Brierley, I work at Astronomy Australia Limited, and I have been there for 8 years now. Started off as a project administrator, and now I'm Chief Business Officer there. When Ursula and Sarah asked me to be on this panel, I thought, oh, well, what do I know about networking in isolation? And I thought, well, actually, I do this most of the time for my job, is engaging with people via Skype, via Zoom, via Teams, everything at the moment. And in fact, I did a lot of this with the international projects that I'm engaged in prior to COVID as well. And in fact, in some ways, COVID's made it easier. And I might expand on that later in the session. Is that all you want from me, Sarah? Do I need?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. And also, I should say to the panelists, if there are particular things you want to talk about or questions you're hoping people will answer, you should feel free to take off on that tangent as well. We have an hour and a half to get to everything that people want to say. So hopefully we will cover a good amount of ground in that time. All right, next up, I'd like to ask Victoria Firth-Smith to introduce yourself.
Kia ora, everyone. My name is V. I'm officially Victoria, but now that we've met, you'll know what to call me when people refer to me as V. I work at the Australian National University. I'm referred to as the thesis whisperer. So I work very closely with Associate Professor Inga Mewburn, and it's usually my job to make sure she's okay. And in doing so, I work across all disciplines supporting PhD candidates across campus. I've been doing that work for 5 years. So I do everything from welcoming people to running thesis boot camps, managing the Visualize Your Thesis 3-minute thesis competition, being a phone a friend to 2,863 candidates. So I know quite a bit about networking in person and online. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, terrific. All right. Next, Geoff Clayton.
Hi, my name is Geoff Clayton. I'm a professor at Louisiana State University. I grew up in Canada and got my PhD there. And then I became an economic immigrant to the United States. And I've now been at LSU for 24 years. I've been working at home for the last 5 months. And speaking to you actually from Canada tonight. It's 10:30 p.m. here. And because I'm in quarantine for 14 days, I'm trying to visit my father who fell and broke his hip a couple of weeks ago. So I was able to get across the border, but now I'm doing my quarantine. I only have 2 more days left, and then I'll be released. And they're quite serious about it here. I'm not allowed to go outside for 14 days. So I haven't been doing too much networking but I've been doing, of course, all my normal Zooms, and I'm going to be starting to teach a class of 240 students next week. So I'm worrying about that. I've done a lot of online teaching before, but I've never done a class this large. So it's going to be an interesting experience. Anyway, thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for staying up so late. I appreciate I guess time zones are one aspect of this that we're gonna have to think about. Okay, and our 4th panelist is Jonti Horner.
Yeah, so hey folks, I'm Jonti. I'm Professor of Astrophysics up at USQ, which is a small regional university about 2 hours inland from Brisbane in the quarantine state of Queensland. We're all hidden away. I'm really kind of a multidisciplinary researcher, so I do solar system work, I do exoplanet work, and I do a lot of astrobiology. And that means, particularly in Australia, I kind of stand with 1 foot in each of 2 camps. In Australia, we've got the ASA community, which is all of these wonderful people here. And there's also the Australian Space Research community who, for reasons of long historical precedent, have their own conference and their own community and their own meetings, and basically totally separate, but there is a bit of cross-mixing there. And I've struggled a little bit to some degree through my career because of a lack of networking opportunities. And so working online is actually really helpful for me because I'm getting those opportunities now. I had the misfortune of being on postdoc positions and during my PhD of not having much in the way of travel opportunities. And to put that in perspective, one of our former PhD students at USQ, Belinda Nicholson, who some of you know, did more traveling and networking in her PhD than I had done in my career to that point in the 17 years since I started my PhD. And that meant that when I was invited to join this session, I was totally kind of imposter syndrome and thinking, I'm terrible at networking, why am I here? But what I realized is I work from home fairly frequently anyway, on and off, so I was doing even before COVID struck. But also USQ is a distance learning university, so I'm supervising quite a large cohort of students with my colleagues. I think I've got 9 PhD students at the minute. And they're not just in Toowoomba where I am, they're in Chile and the US and all over the place. So we do our PhD supervision and all of our contact through Zoom. And so that means that I'm very habituated to it. I spend something like 20 to 25 hours a week sat in Zoom meetings. And therefore, whilst I don't feel like I'm a good networker, I do a lot of networking through Zoom particularly. And so hopefully there's a little bit that I can contribute whilst dodging the imposter syndrome.
All right, well, thank you all very much for being here. We really do appreciate your various experiences and insights. And so I'm looking forward to this. I'd like to start you off with just sort of a general, to get your thoughts on sort of why do we do networking? What is the benefits to you personally? Why would you advise other people to go and be intentionally working on networking?
I can dive in there quickly as someone who's never been particularly great at it. I think one of the things that I see as benefits to networking is getting word out there about you as an excellent individual and also the work that you're doing. And I've got papers from earlier in my career that I'm really proud of that people haven't come across because they don't necessarily stumble across them when they're just browsing ADS, but if they've seen you give a talk, they'll come across your work. If they've spoken to you in person, they will look you up. So networking is a really good way of ensuring that your message gets out there in much the same way as a lot of the outreach stuff that we do is a really good way of getting the work about your work out to a wider community. And from a point of view of getting the next job and getting to the next level in the game that is your career, you're more likely to be shortlisted, I think, if people know you because they know your application and your CV in context. And this is why getting introduced to people at conferences and stuff is really useful. Because even if you just have a 5-minute chat with them, they can put a face to the name. And first and foremost, people are hiring human beings. They want someone they can work with. And a CV is a very drab and dour document without context. And if they can place you in context and say, oh, wow, they gave a great talk, or I had a really interesting chat with them, that can actually help make the difference to get you to the shortlist, to get you to the point where you can really make that impression.
Yeah, I'd just like to second what Jonti was saying. I mean, it's hard to overemphasize the importance of networking for your career, for all aspects. I mean, when I went to my first meeting, I was too shy basically to talk to anyone. I didn't know anybody, and certainly had imposter syndrome. But now, of course, when I go to a meeting, I know too many people. My mean free path is usually about 10 feet before I meet someone. And as an introvert, I find it to be a real effort to talk to people continuously for a week. It's definitely worth it, but at the end of the week, I'm completely exhausted. But as far as meeting people that you can work with, people that you can apply for time observing, and of course, what Jonti was saying, really meeting people that you might be applying to jobs for is really important as well.
Yeah, and look, I'd say very similar things, you know, and I think it's important, especially for astronomy. I know when I got into astronomy, and I didn't say that in the beginning, but I do have a PhD in astronomy to start with, and then moved into management. But even back as you know, when I was in astronomy as a researcher, and I really got into it because I thought, oh, you know, it's all in my mind. I can just get on with work. I can, you know, and everyone will just know that the work I'm doing is fantastic and brilliant and all the rest. But people don't know that without knowing you. And you tend to, what I found, you know, since moving on from the research and moving into management and seeing a lot of proposals and requests for money and all that sort of thing, people take you more seriously if they know a little bit about you first. And it's just seems to be, you know, human nature that you pay attention to the people that you've already connected with. And so the more you can get out there and connect with people, the more likely you are to be able to generate new collaborations, generate funding, and progress in your career.
Yeah, I agree, Mita. I think it's there's nothing more generous actually than, in my mind, than being a researcher. To dedicate your life and energy into something that you're curious and passionate about is like, thank you for that work. I don't have enough lifetimes to do all this work and know everything that I want to know about. So I really appreciate researchers having the innovation, the collaborations to do that and then share it back with me. I think a few people have mentioned imposter syndrome today. And I think that's, if you actually lean into your curiosity and your interests and your passions, that's not something to be an imposter about. You're welcome to be curious about ice cream as well as astronomy or astrophysics or, you know, other television shows, your family, your faith. And so I think in the academy, we do want to see it as a competition and do see things in terms of our career outputs and our progress. But actually, if we see it as a community of people who have a curiosity that, you know, they want to connect with your ideas and ways of knowing and being, that really changes the balance of power. So for me, networking is about geeking out with other people that are really into what I'm into. And that's delicious, that's delightful, that's wonderful. And so I can be shy and introverted, which even though my brooch is doing all the like pizzazz for me, I don't need to bring it in my personality. But I think it's, once I realized that actually there are some books that we've all read and there are some research papers that would really like to discover through each other. And so that has an absolute career benefit, but it also has like a social, human affirming benefit of that the time that we have on this earth is really precious. So sharing it with one another is a true gift, I think. So I see it as a generous thing, not just as a must do for career success.
Well, excellent. Thank you all so much for your thoughts there. I would like to also ask all of your thoughts on what are the tools that you use for networking, particularly now as compared to previously. Is there any particular good like tech or something that you find really useful in meeting new people or communicating well with people?
So meeting new people in the current environment is difficult, and it's really something person to person where it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of innovation and it takes a lot of extrovertedness, and it is. I think person to person, you need to decide what it is that you want from a network and whether you should be taking this time to consolidate or build on or strengthen the networks that you already have, or be going out there to look for new people. In this environment, the easiest way to meet new people is to get introductions through people you already know and set up specific meetings through those people that you already know for on you know, certain things that you know you have in common with the new people that you want to interact with. In terms of tools, I'm probably not hugely innovative here, but it's because we've sort of had a lot of tools forced on us. I mean, Zoom, of course, everybody's had Zoom forced on them, but similar things as well. You know, WhatsApp has been a great way of maintaining contact with large groups of separate sort of networks that I have all over the world. Teams is a great way for sort of, you know, keeping communications flowing amongst, you know, closer networks that are, you know, that you're working on particular things with. Slack, there's lots of those sort of things, but even things like Facebook groups that you can engage in a I try not to use things, social media for work-related things, but I find myself doing that. So I'm in, you know, woman in astronomy Facebook groups and woman in space science Facebook groups, and I was part of the Homeward Bound program last year, so we have Homeward Bound Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups and all sorts of things.
Yeah. I would be curious to know how building a network with government people is different to with research people, because I know you interact with government a lot.
Yeah, so government people, and I'm probably not very good at this yet, and it's one that I haven't worked on specifically within the last few months with COVID. It's really been building on the connections that we already have with government, and it's building on, actually, I have had to do a little bit of expanding the level of engagement with certain members in government than I normally would have over COVID, because our CEO was on leave for a couple of months, and I was taking over that role, and that involves a lot of engagement with government folk. And there was, before our CEO went on leave, he made those introductions. They were already there. They're all people I already knew, but he specifically said, here's Mita, she'll be taking on that role, and it gave me that in to then be able to keep in touch with them more regularly and in the way that I would want to do it. So I could call up and say, hey, it's been a month. I just want to give you an update on how things are going in the CEO's absence, and just want to keep you in the loop, because I don't necessarily know how much the CEO would necessarily keep you in the loop. So I'm going to do it my way, and that means more contact than they might be used to. So that gave me an in to be able to keep up that relationship. Pre-COVID, a lot of ways to build those networks were to be visible when there were opportunities to be in Canberra, and visit around all of those the different groups that we were engaged in. It's also a little bit different because my day-to-day work puts me in contact with them fairly regularly as well.
Okay. Other thoughts from the panel on good tools for keeping your communications open?
Another tool that we use is Overleaf for writing papers together. Obviously, everybody's on like 20 Slack channels, which I'm not sure. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. One thing I was just going to say that Mita said at the beginning is, it's hard to meet people right now, but if you contact most other scientists and you say, can you send me your data, or I'm planning a collaboration, I find that most people are very happy to hear from you and very happy if the data is still accessible to send it to you. A couple of years ago, I was trying to put together a large JWST proposal, and I got 64 people together, so it was a lot of those people I'd never met, and I was just sort of cold calling them on email, just telling them, because they were working in this area, obviously, but trying to get them together. So most of those 64 people were people that I had not worked with before, but we were all interested in the same thing, and got together, and then our proposal was rejected.
Naturally. That's a whole
Sarah,
different panel topic.
I was just going to say, so I just got a private message from Natalia, who hasn't got a video on, but she's somewhere here on the call, and I thought this was a good example of someone that was a good way to network someone. So she'd actually contacted me a little while ago to talk about an application for something, and that connection was made through another person. So the other person said to us, a mutual contact that said, would you be interested in answering questions for this person? And I said, absolutely. So using the people that you do know to get introductions to others is, it's sort of basic networking tactic to do that.
I was going to say much the same. I think the warm introductions are so powerful, and as you gradually know people, everybody knows other people. And there was a good example last week. I was talking about this in our Astro meeting earlier on at USQ. We have a kind of weekly, fairly social get together over Zoom. And I submitted a paper to the AAS journals at the start of last week, start of 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And as part of that process, had a non-preferred reviewer to put in, which is just you happen to sometimes have people you don't want to referee your paper for very good reasons. And when I did that, it wouldn't let me submit until I wrote out and gave an explicit reason for this. And I had pretty huge catastrophic problems with this, because I think it goes against best practice for people who've had trauma, people who've been bullied, to actually have to disclose. But it read to me as though you had to do this. And I don't know the AAS editors. They don't know me. So they're not going to respond well to an email from random bloke in Australia who says, I am unhappy. You know, this is never good. But through collaborators I've got, Peter Plavchan in the US knows them really well. So I reached out to him. I had a chat with him in a meeting and said, look, I was made uncomfortable by this for these reasons, but I don't know the editorial staff. And he acted as a bridge. So I sent him an email explaining what was wrong, and he got in touch with them and said, hey, you know, this feels a bit odd. I've got a colleague who's very concerned about it for these reasons. And it turns out they're happy for you to say, prefer not to disclose our personal reasons, and that's it. And they're now hopefully going to change it. Now, I'm becoming fairly senior. I'm in my 40s now. And I still felt more comfortable getting the warm introduction and having someone act as a bridge than actually cold contacting someone, because I think you get a warmer reception that way. In terms of Caroline's question about how you make it more human, more sociable, I think do that fairly well at USQ, in that they are more relaxed meetings. Most of our meetings, whether they're group meetings or PhD meetings, are not having an agenda. We're just having a chat. And yes, there are things that need raising, but it feels more friendly. And I've been doing a lot of things. You saw earlier on I had an animated background, which works for a lot of people, doesn't for others. So I've changed that now. Things like that make it a more relaxed environment for me. And I've had a couple of meetings actually with colleagues with very small children where the kids were being a bit problematic. One of the backgrounds I've got as an animated background is a fabulous film called My Neighbor Totoro, which is an 1 hour and 3/4 long, beautiful Studio Ghibli kids film. So I put that on the background, and the kids just sat there and watched the movie while we did the networking, and it was brilliant. So there's advantages to all these things. I've never got on with Slack and Discord and things like this. We've got different groups trying to use different things. Teams, we tried to use a couple of weeks ago and was an abomination unto the world. It
really is
terrible. And I then spent 2 weeks trying to uninstall it, and it kept and it's horrible. It's nearly as bad as Skype. But I've also found things like Twitter and the conversation have been useful for me in terms of networking. Not in terms of Twitter, you can ping people and you can put the word out there about your work, and there is a body of evidence that suggests that papers that are talked about on Twitter get, I think it's 4 times as many citations as those that don't, because of the bigger reach. And there was a lot of grumpiness from senior professors about how dare people get advantage from putting their papers out on Twitter. This is breaking the system. To which everybody who's younger in the career said, isn't that what happens when you put your paper in Nature? It's the same thing. It's increasing the exposure, and that does get you kind of soft connections with people, and they'll get in touch with you. The conversation's a bit different in that it gives you a method to get the word out there about your work whilst controlling the message that reaches a much, much bigger audience, but you're still writing scientifically. So you get the bigger audience, and I have had researchers get in touch with me off the back of conversation articles to discuss things further that wouldn't have seen my papers. So don't discount these kind of indirect networking things where you don't think of it as doing something for networking, you're doing it for something else, but it can get you the networking as a kind of fringe benefit almost.
Yeah,
V,
can I add to that as well?
Oh yeah, please.
So in terms of what we're finding is everybody's getting Zoom fatigue, right? It's really, really tiring being on meetings all day, every day. And then trying to organize meetings where, you know, you just have a chat. People are tired and they don't want to do it. But if you sort of set up an expectation and a culture of it, then it's really helpful. So AAL, within the first sort of almost as soon as everybody started working from home, so back in March, one of the first things we did was we did morning tea together every day, 10 a.m. morning tea together. And it's the one Zoom meeting I really enjoy. We do it over Zoom. It's the one Zoom meeting I really enjoy. We all just chat. We just chat about whatever it is that we feel like. And sometimes work gets thrown in there. There's no agenda, but it's just coffee. But we are having this struggle with. I mean, and it's less networking. It's sort of networking in that, but it's more team bonding. And our team has bonded better than we had pre-COVID, particularly the Sydney, Melbourne. We have teams in both Sydney and Melbourne, and that connection has sort of broken down amongst all of, there's no difference now between, you know, the Melbourne folk and the Sydney folk. We all chat together and know each other really well. So that's, you know, a positive that's come out of it. In terms of, you know, other groups that we often engage with, and we're trying to get them to work together, the networking aspect is actually a lot more important, because we see this in our committee meetings, in our board meetings. Everybody's tired. You know, you're just going bang, 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 bang through a meeting agenda, and there's a lack of engagement because of that. So we're trying out a few different things. We're trying to make meetings more engaging and more interactive by using things like, there's a program that we've been trying out called WooClap, which lets you vote and do all sorts of things online with your people. You can embed it into your presentations, and it gets a bit more interaction that way. One of the things we're trying out for the next AAL board meeting is a virtual star party. And so this is before the board meeting, just to get the AAL board, you know, interacting with each other as people, because without that sort of social interaction, you just don't actually gel as well. And you know, while you're efficient, you might not be getting the best outcomes for your actual meetings where you need important decisions to be made. So yeah, we're going to connect up. There's a few people that have telescopes with cameras and things joined to them, and so we're going to try and connect up one night. And we've done that within the AL staff team as well. And it was voluntary, but pretty much everybody turned up. It was and it was fun. And and in amongst all of that, you just kind of chat about other things as well. So there's a couple of ideas, but it's not easy.
Yeah, okay. So there's been a bit of a side conversation going on in the chat that's actually connected to a thing I wanted to go back to, which is that V was saying something about something called Shut Up and Write. And I would like to know, is this a service? Do you call people and tell them to shut up? Can you call me?
Yeah,
So
I absolutely can, Sarah. Now that I have your number, yes, I can. The name is problematic. You know, the name's not great. But Shut Up and Write is a phenomenon that's been happening, you know, across the world for at least a decade. It sort of started in cafes where novelists would meet up and, you know, sit with their laptops and have a coffee and just write together, because the ambient sounds and the accountability of seeing you there at 10 o'clock kind of helped. It came into universities a while ago, and we used to host them at cafes at the ANU, and then we hosted them with dinners at Graduate House, then we hosted weekends, nights, morning, you name it. It became, it's a really incredible practice, in the same way that I'm not a yogi, but my yoga friends talk about returning to the mat and the practice of just getting to the mat. Whatever happens on the mat is what's going to happen. But so the process of getting to a laptop and a bottom on a chair and whatever happens in that time is magical. And so my team started working from home in February. Our manager was very cautious. The second COVID was even announced. So we were off campus before the campus closed. And so it was important to me to create a regular rhythm in people's days, because I was finding that I was working till like 4 a.m. and then getting up at 10 a.m. My whole life was kind of, I didn't even know where I was at that time. So it was for me as well as my colleagues. So we now have about 60 people who show up. We're doing semester 1, we do it 4 times a week. Semester 2, we have it twice a week. And you're welcome to join us. It's just putting it in your diary to say, hey, I'm going to sit and do some work for this 2-hour chunk of time. We play games, we dance, we learn new languages. Like, you know, it's a fun way to reconnect and try and keep things, you know, patiently and persistently we're bound to be successful. So I think it's just to bring the practice and rhythm back in. So ANU definitely doesn't own it. I invite you all to create your own if you wish. People also in their family now have Shut Up and Write, like shut up and clean, or shut up and, you know, do your dishes, or shut up and do, like, walk the dog. So it's also a way of being connected, sort of in a focused, meditative way together. So yeah, so it's great. Join us, please. Everyone join us. Nick and I would be happy to have you with us.
It's also a fabulous, fabulous way, and this is advice I've got from other people that seems to work, of getting around the problem that you get more and more of, well, we're on Zoom, so we're getting this exponential increase in the number of meetings. And, you know, I'm on Zoom 20, 25 hours a week. And if I've got nothing in my calendar and someone says, oh, can I have a quick chat? I'll just hop on because you do and it's important. But if I've got a 4-hour block blocked out where there's a few of us sat there and we're doing nothing but writing and we're aggressively writing at each other, and it's really dull for anyone trying to watch because we're just head down and occasionally someone will say, oh, what does this sentence sound like, whatever. It's blocked in your calendar so you can legitimately say, sorry, I'm in a meeting. I can't do that. And that way you actually get long enough tranches of time for you to actually do the stuff you're meant to be doing, rather than spending your time doing all the, spending your time during your office hours doing the stuff you're not meant to be doing and then spending your evenings doing your actual work. With that in mind, I don't know how many people have been doing this, but for those who are drawing a salary here in Australia, there is simplified tax rules for working from home and claiming it at tax time. And that requires keeping a log of the hours that you're working. And so I started doing that on March 1st because I wanted to get as much of the government's money back as possible, essentially. And that's been a real eye-opener to me because you don't realise to what degree your work hours balloon out, especially during times like this. But as soon as you're logging it and you realise, oh God, I'm doing, essentially almost 2 jobs here or a job and a half and they're not paying me for it, that's a real indication that you should possibly manage it better or that you should focus down or whatever. Hasn't necessarily worked for me yet in that I'm still clocking more hours than I should do, but just simply having that eye-opening thing here of, oh dear, this is problematic is really helpful. And it's particularly true with the very international nature of the way we work. I mean, I had started today with a meeting at 8 a.m. the same as yesterday because colleagues in the US, that's their afternoon. But if you're then having meetings with people in Europe, it balloons at the other end as well. And so keeping that kind of timesheet, it means you can get money back from the government and, never object to getting more money back. But it can also give you a data-driven, essentially, reason to realize when you're getting things a little bit out of balance.
Yeah, so that's something that came up in the chat just now. Nicole had two different things. But you said something about starting very early and possibly going very late, and that Nicole had a question about sort of when you know that there are people in a very different time zone from you, but you want to be building your relationships with them. Like, how do you manage to get that in without making your day ridiculous?
Lots of compromise. I mean, I can talk to that a little bit because of the distribution of our PhD students. So we try and make sure that we have not a week's worth of face-to-face every hour, an hour's worth of face-to-face every week with each PhD student who's full-time, essentially. And that becomes challenging when they're all over the place. And it involves a certain amount of compromise from everybody to find time zones that work. And for me, it seems to be a case of working between yourselves to find the least worst solution, because you're never going to find the best solution. And remembering that nobody ever on their deathbed says, you know what, I wish I'd spent more hours at work. So remembering that you need to take self-care into account and you can't just be really nice, because if you're nice to everybody else, you'll end up being unfair to yourself. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. So I kind of view it as working with compromise and finding a time zone that is relatively okay for both of you, rather than suits one person and the other person is god awful for. And if worst comes to the worst, you've got email, you keep the meetings shorter, you try and make them a little bit less frequent, things like that. It's amazing how much you can get done when you say, look, we've only got half an hour. You probably cover the same amount of stuff as you would do in the hour anyway, just with a little bit less social.
Yeah. Geoff, you mentioned that you work with a lot of people. I imagine this is relevant for you as well.
Yeah, I think one thing I really like to do is to say that Zoom cannot last longer than 1 hour. And obviously that's doesn't always work, but I do think that most of the time that's long enough. So I was just, in fact, I'm trying, since the new term starting next week, trying to find new times for my team meetings that are held every week. And it's almost like there's no hour in the week where everybody can make at the same time. That's another issue if you're having so many Zooms, or of course, once you get into term, then you've got lots of hours. I'm teaching 3 hours online, and then I'm going to have another hour or two for office hours online. And so it's going to get worse and worse. The other thing that came up in the chat was about when the cuppa chat came up. I definitely, certainly when it's a small enough group, I definitely like to start by asking people how they are, how their family is. Even in emails, I try to make sure that I always say, you know, how are you? And just get a little human interaction there. It doesn't have to be a lot, but I think it helps.
Yeah, I'd definitely agree with that, having that little bit of human interaction. And these days, you've always got the start off of, you know, especially if you're dealing with people overseas, how are you dealing with the COVID situation in your country? And it usually starts a good, you know, 5 to 10 minutes of chat before you get into the main thing. And it just creates that connection. And it doesn't have to be about that. It can be about, you know, if you know you share a shared interest of skiing or whatever, you can just kind of start the conversation with something light to form that connection before you move into the deeper things. So there's lots of conversation about how to deal with time differences and time lags and things in the chat at the moment. I don't know if we wanted to move into that, Sarah, at all.
Well, I think it'd be really helpful to talk about. Yeah, so I guess the idea that we often think of networking as this in-person thing, and so we can use Zoom or we can do something that's synchronous, but you know, if you know someone is in 10 hours away from you, probably something asynchronous is going to make more sense. So yeah, if you've got thoughts on how that works for you, that'd be great.
Well, I don't have many examples of how things are asynchronous, actually. I do a lot of late night meetings with particularly Europeans, which is my comment in the chat. And a lot of the time, it's actually been easier since COVID, because a lot of the time the meetings and things that I was attending virtually, because I just couldn't fly to Europe that often, were in the middle of the night. And not only that, but I would be one of the very few people that were on Zoom while everybody else was in the room. And that is not an effective way to be involved in a meeting or to network, obviously. And I would suggest avoiding that as much as possible, although of course it's not always possible. Since COVID has happened and everybody is on Zoom, even though there's the time difference, at least they get the understanding of how difficult it is to engage over Zoom. Although I don't think they quite understand what it's like when there's a whole bunch of people in a room and you're not quite there. But we are trying to move meetings around to cater for the Australians and the Americans. And it really is just sort of putting your hand up and saying, hey, actually, can we change that meeting time to make it a little bit more bearable for us? Because a lot of the time they just don't think about it. They know, oh yeah, it's 2 o'clock in the morning for the Australians, but you know, they'll either join or they won't. But if you say, look, we had our last meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning, can we please change the time to 10 p.m. our time, or you know, something that works for you a bit more reasonably. You know, you might not always get a reasonable time, but you might get a more reasonable time that works for more people.
One thing,
yeah, certainly in one of the big collaborations that I'm in, we alternate our science meeting between mornings and afternoons, Australia time, so that we can get the Europeans in one week and the Americans in the other week, and make sure that everybody is seeing each other's work and sort of just keeping those ties kept up.
One of the groups that I'm involved in as a sort of support network, and we have people in Australia, in the US, and in different time zones in the US and in Europe. And what we have worked out is we're all roughly 8 hours apart. So we just rotate that. So it's 6 a.m. for someone, 2 p.m. for someone, 10 p.m. for someone, and we just rotate that.
Yeah. One thing that my colleagues in the Desert Fireball Network have started doing, and we've had a couple of these meetings so far, which I think is really good, is they've got a network of collaborators that's Australia, Europe, and the US, like a lot of these things. And rather than try and get everybody to one meeting, they are sacrificing themselves to an extent as the kind of main organisers, sending out doodle polls and running a West meeting and an East meeting every time they do it, which brackets the end of the Australian working day. So one is kind of 8, 9 a.m, the other is 6 or 7 p.m. And that means they can talk to the they can talk to the American community and the European community as 2 separate meetings and then cross-pollinate. It's still not ideal, but it means that everybody then gets a meeting at a relatively bearable time rather than 1/3 getting it at a utterly unbearable time.
Okay, so another theme that's sort of different from what we've been talking about that's come up in the chat is sort of bringing a more junior perspective to this. And I know there's been a little discussion, Jonti, you were talking about jargon. And another question that I would have is, as a junior person, possibly someone looking for a PhD position or a postdoc position, how do you go about introducing yourself to people? Is it okay to cold call people that you might be interested in working with? Or is it better to go through a network? Or sort of, are there rules around this? What are people's thoughts?
I don't think there are rules. So when I was a PhD student, I remember cold calling or writing to a collaborator in Italy, and that was a big step for me because that's not the sort of thing huge imposter syndrome as a student as well. But he'd been writing lots of papers that I was interested in and was working along the same lines as what I was doing. So I just wrote to them and I said, I'm going to be in Europe for a conference. Can I come and visit you afterwards? And they were completely warm about it. Yes, of course. And then there have been other instances where I've gone through, networks that my supervisor had or other people that I was engaged with had. I don't think there are rules. The rules are what you set up for yourself.
I struggle with kind of cold contacting people, but I'll usually try and get someone I trust to have a quick read through the email before I send it, and I'll always read an email aloud. Actually, that's one of my rules to myself, is I'll read it out loud, because then you say what is written even though you're reading what you thought you wrote, and you get this dissonance and you trip up, and that's why you thought you've made a mistake. So that actually works really well. But what I mean by try and turn it around is, I think about, if someone contacted me, what do you think? We're all to some degree introverts with this, and we hate contacting people, and will they want to be contacted? And oh God, I can't, I don't want to trouble them. But if you get an email from someone that says, I've just seen your paper on Archive and I really enjoyed it, I'd love to talk about it. You're not going to go, oh God, I've been troubled by someone. You're going to go, oh wow, I got a positive email, this is great. And you're bringing that joy to someone else. So you're sat here nervous and terrified thinking they'll never want to talk to me. But I'm getting dancing, this is always good. So if you can view it through that lens, you're actually probably going to make someone's day, so long as you do it right. I mean, that said, when you're sending emails out, we get a lot of random solicitations from people looking to do a PhD with us. And I've had any number of times where I can tell that it's a copy and paste email that they've sent to 2,000 people where they've just copied a paper title into it. So, dear Professor Horner, I am so-and-so, and I read your paper about Jupiter friend or foe, and I thought you'd be good to work with. I'm interested in mechanical engineering. It's like, well, it's no link, So writing the email to someone rather than writing one batch email and sending it out, because people will notice, and try and avoid you. I've got, as you're probably already noticing in chat, I've got a terrible habit of using all the world's emojis when I type, because I touch type at about the speed I talk, because I used to do text-based online gaming a lot during my PhD while my simulations were running. And in a forum where you don't have the visual cues, it becomes just totally second nature to almost finish every sentence with an emoji, because that's giving a virtual physical cue. And I think there are more senior people who feel a bit cringy about smileys as a form of punctuation, but I do it so naturally I don't even notice, and I've never had anybody get offended. And it is possibly, I wouldn't necessarily say put them on your CV, but if you find yourself using them in emails, the most important thing is for your voice to be your own, not to be false. And if that's who you are, so long as it's not over the top and loads of text speak and lol, JK, all the rest of it, a little bit of that kind of thing, a little bit of informality is not the end of the world.
I have bit of a different question to ask the panelists about conferencing. I'm sure most of you have been organizing conferences. I certainly know Geoff has been co-organizer of the AAS, one of the biggest. We know that we would never gone that way had we not been forced, but this experiment that now has been forced has been really interesting, right? So it's many things, aside from being much more environmentally sound, are great about online conference. And perhaps in the future, we'll resume in some mixed mode that will be beneficial in general. So the question I have is, what's the advice for people who go to virtual conferences? What are the advice for people who are maybe co-organizing virtual conferences? And what are we learning? And is this, what have we yet to learn perhaps?
If I may jump in to that, Ursula, only because I went to the worst online conference in the history of humanity last week. So it's fresh for me. I think I really invite every conference organizer, attendee, presenter to really be respectful of people's time and energy, especially during a global pandemic. And I just think that's a no-brainer, really. Like, just make sure that things are efficient and as effective as possible. Jonti, you'd be pleased to know that they used Teams for 90% of it, and the whole thing broke because everyone had a Mac and they hadn't tested the platform, all that, like, you name it, it went wrong. So I think really investing in the crew's time in terms of preparation, and then really testing how people are going to engage. I'm all about being in a sandpit and giving it a crack and co-creating. Like, I'm doing a PhD in design. There's a lot of post-it notes. But I think it really comes back to respect. So respecting that people's time and energy is really finite at this moment, but also respecting that there are many ways to do it. And some people won't want to do a video presentation pre-recorded and put it on YouTube. Some would love that opportunity. So I think, yeah, that would be my greatest one is, understand who you're working with and what the goal is of the conference. Please, anyone, what's the goal?
Just following on from that, not necessarily purely from the online conferences thing, but I think it's really true there. I have always got on well with being a session chair and have tried to get early career researchers to be session chairs because I tend to find they're actually better at it than senior people because they pay attention and stuff like that. But I make it clear to speakers before they talk that I'm going to give them a 5-minute warning and a 2-minute warning, and then I will stand up and drag them off stage if they overrun. Because I think the most important thing when you're giving talks at conferences and stuff is to be courteous to the audience and to the other speakers. And if you've got, I remember one time when we had an hour-and-a-half session, we had an invited speaker with a 20-minute talk who talked for 40 minutes and was allowed to, and then every student who had a talk after that was cut off early. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time. And that was just so unpleasant and rude. And if you make your expectations clear right at the start, everybody's on board. And if you have to cut someone off, it's done and you move on. So I was wondering with that in terms of online moderation, making damn sure, that your moderators and your coordinators have some training and support beforehand to know that they've got the backup to cut off Brian Schmidt as a Nobel Prize winner if he's talked for 3 hours in a 20-minute slot. Brian's brilliant, so use him as an example. Give them the support so they know they can do that, but give them the ability to mute and to kill screen share for speakers. If worse comes to worse, and say, look, your time's up, we have to move on. Anybody who's got questions, send them through private messages and try and keep it to time, because if your Zoom fatigue is killing you, the last thing you want is for a session to go an hour over time.
Yeah, so we had the first virtual American Astronomical Society meeting in June, and we faced all of these issues, but it actually went much better than we thought it would. It was set up, the structure, very much like a normal meeting, in that we had the plenary sessions and we had all of the individual talks were e-posters, but we had workshops and things as well. But so in the oral sessions, we did have that where the session chair, there would be 2 people always, the session chair and a technical person, and they were the 2 people that had the power to mute and unshare. And the other nice thing, of course, with the virtual thing is you have this huge clock in front of you while you're giving your talk, so it's hard to ignore how much time you have left. But so I think talk-wise, it was, or as far as all the paper stuff, everything went very smoothly. The only part that wasn't fully there was the networking part. We did have sessions in the evening, Zoom sessions where people got together, and we even had breakout rooms and things for people to talk. There wasn't really, and some of the interaction software did not work perfectly. And I think the next meeting, so the AAS is going to do their winter meeting virtually as well. The other thing that happened, which was very interesting, since our summer meetings usually much smaller than the winter meeting, we ended up having about twice as many people as usual registering for the meeting. And so there's definitely, one of the issues there is that a lot of people don't go to meetings. They don't have the travel money or the hotel money. And so they were taking advantage of this opportunity. And as Ursula's, or somebody was saying, this kind of thing, we may be doing these meetings in the future, either doing fully virtual meetings or some kind of hybrid meeting where people can attend in person or virtually. Now, I just want to say there's a big danger there of creating a class system. If you're having all hybrid meetings, then the rich people still going to go to the meeting, be there person to person, and other people will not be able to go and will be there only virtually. And so we need to be very careful. It's an opportunity to get more people and a greater diversity at meetings, but we have to be very careful how we do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Geoff. And it comes from the experience of sitting in on meetings that I'm not physically present at when the majority of people are. You're just not effective, and it's not good for you, and it's not good for the meeting in terms of, you know, your contribution either. But I do think, you know, all virtual meetings definitely will have their place moving forward, and in that sense, it is a you know, a balancer across a lot of different issues that people may have, from travel money to looking after children to you know, being physically able to be at meetings. So I, you know, in that aspect, I think it's opened up a whole new realm of possibilities that people weren't willing to accept anymore, and it's also somewhat sped up the process of moving to virtual meetings as an alternate in an environmental awareness sense. What I would say is that, you know, we're in a period now where this is being forced upon us, and people are a little bit more forgiving because everybody understands that people are finding their feet. So it's a really good time to use that opportunity to really figure out how this can work and can work effectively. And that's not to say, you know, waste people's time, because we're in COVID trying out lots of new things, but you know, it is an opportunity to try out targeted things that and to see if they work. One of the, I haven't actually been to any conferences in the last couple of months, but I have been involved in either organising or aware of or had an interest in a number of them. I just chose not to attend. But there have been some companies that have put out networking software for, particularly for conferences, and it's things like, you know, you have little avatars that walk around, and when your avatar gets close to another avatar, suddenly you can see them on screen and chat by video. So it's, I haven't been involved, but I've heard mixed reviews about it. Some people have said, you know, that works really well, and I think it depends on the software you were using as well, because there's a lot of people flooding the market with this kind of thing now, and I think they're all in various stages of actually being ready to go to market. But that's something to keep a lookout for and be aware of as well, to see how we can use that kind of technology in conferences moving forward.
Yeah, so V mentioned Second Life, and it's interesting to me that the sort of the online gaming infrastructure actually works really well for this. We use Discord for some of our teaching, and the idea of using like a VR game as a way to actually get a lot of people together is really clever because it exists already and it can handle that many people. I wanted to ask all the panelists if you have particular advice for ECRs, for students going to virtual conferences, how to make the best use of that time.
Well, I always tell my students to do the opposite of what I did at my first conference, which is to just walk straight up to people and start talking to them. So, you know, go up to their poster. I mean, it's really scary, but if you can do it, again, it quite like what was said earlier, that most people react very positively if you're showing interest in their work and you say, you know, I read your paper, or I want to, please tell me about your poster. And so if you do that, you know, it's going to be great about 90% of the time. But I think it's very difficult that first time to do it.
Yeah, I found that face-to-face. I've not managed to get to any of the in-person ones, but yeah, a number of times I've stood at my poster desperately wanting someone to come and talk to me because I'm bored out of my skull. I'm stood there with a half-drunk glass of not very pleasant, warm, whatever the drink was, waiting for someone to talk to me. And, you know, you make eye contact with people and everyone's nervous, so they immediately look away and walk off. It's like, you know, and the people you wanting to talk to are going to be in that exact same boat. So if you go up to them and say, oh, this seems really cool, could you tell me more about it? Again, you'll probably make their day. So it's one of those things where your social anxiety that we all have is holding you back. But if you can spin it from the point of view, I'm going to do them a favor and just give them a couple of minutes of being perked up and someone to talk to, you never know. You know, try and turn it around that way, because we all like making other people happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are jerks everywhere, okay? Like, we know that. There are jerks online, offline, in the supermarket, at work, in the academy. So not to take that too personally if someone is rude or offensive, just to say thank you for that information. If I'm ever on a board, a panel, a grant, like, not, you're not going to get $1 out of me or support out of me potentially. You don't have to be that non-generous. But also I see conferences like going to a music festival or a wooden boat festival or a dog park. Like, we've all got a reason for being there because we share an interest and a passion. So you've already got something to talk about. It's not like you're sitting next to someone, you know, on a plane, which you're stuck with for 10 hours. You're like, oh no, if I say hi, that's it. Like, I'm going to get their life's journey. Oh no. Like, this is an opportunity for you to, oh, I have to also see my friend or colleague. It's so nice meeting you. Practice those niceties. Get in quick, get out quick if you have to, is my tip.
Brilliant. Okay, so I guess it comes down to just sort of being willing to put yourself out there, but also having kind of an escape plan if necessary.
Oh yeah, we all need those.
All right. So yeah, so there's another question that's come up in chat, which is Maddie was saying that she's starting a new job remotely and wondering about good ways to get to know people without actually being there in person.
So I can start with this because we've just had a new person start in August, completely remotely from shutdown in Melbourne. We did have one meeting with 2 of the staff that were already in Melbourne that specifically went into the office to be able to, you know, give her a computer and start her up, log her into the network, that sort of thing. But it's not just for the people trying to get into a new job, it's recognizing that for people who are already in a position and new people are coming in. For us, the coffees, the casual coffees that we have are really important to be able to just get them involved in the banter of the group and sort of, you know, getting to know everybody. And that's a bit overwhelming for the new person sometimes because, you know, you're getting to know everybody that's already established. But even just having that banter between the established team and that new person, just listening in helps bring them in. And then you have side conversations with them afterwards. And I know the others are all anti-teens, but we've found for our team, it was forced on us because the university that we hosted at has forced it on us. But we find for informal conversations, the chat function, and actually also even the chat function and the private chat function and Zoom and other things, you know, they're great for side conversations. They're great for me just going, oh, you know, so-and-so, how are you today? And I always start with that. How are you today? How was your weekend? Whatever it was, like that, and then come in with, you know, can we have a chat about X, Y, Z, whatever that might be. But and even just being able to call them on Teams when I can see that they're free and go, right, I can call you and have a chat, because sometimes typing just takes too long. It's kind of like talking to them on the phone. And we usually, you know, if it's a 1 minute question, I usually leave like 10 minutes to be able to have the back and forth on the chat and the time necessary to be able to make those personal connections. So it is hard as a new person coming onto a team. I think it's something that people who are already on teams need to be aware of when they're bringing a new person on in this environment. And if it's not there, it could be something that you can suggest. You know, hi, I'm new, I'm finding it really hard to be able to connect with people under the current environment. Can we introduce something like morning coffees, just so that we, or, you know, a 10-minute chat at the beginning of the day, is just so we can get to know each other and I can get to know people a bit better.
Yeah, just a thought that springs from that, talking about the chat functions. You'll notice I keep looking over to the right here. If you have any form of startup funds, putting a bit of money aside to make sure you've got more than one monitor is a godsend. So I've got 3 screens here. I've actually got my right hand one turned around so it's tall mode rather than wide mode, which is brilliant for reading purpose, but I've got the chat window there at the minute. And one of the biggest hindrances to that kind of networking is lack of real estate. And I appreciate you're not always in a position where you can just say, you know, I'm going to buy another monitor. But if you're starting up at a place and you've got a bit of startup funds for your computer, or you can talk to IT, find out if they've got any spare monitors lying around. It's really handy, because here I've got the chat window with its entire own monitor. That's the tall monitor I can just keep glancing over. One thing, USQ, we're always dealing with this in terms of new PhD students coming on board, and they kind of trickle in, dribbling through the year. So there isn't just one start date, especially because quite a few are self-funded, part-time, all the rest of it. Brad, our boss at USQ, has this weekly ASHRA meeting that we run, which is 10 to 11 on a Wednesday. And it's not quite a coffee meeting, because you are talking about stuff. But whenever there's anyone new there, whether we're in person or online, he'll go around the table and get everybody to introduce themselves for 30 seconds. And then over time, you get to know each other. And I found that works really well, and we get people to engage well. I mean, you do still run into the problem that the same people talk a lot and the same people are fairly quiet, but it helps people get to know people. The chat function works really well with it. And I think it's worked quite well. And it certainly made me feel welcome when I started here, 6 years ago?
Yeah, Jonti, just on that, I think the loops around the room or the Zoom room introducing people is really good. I often make it that it's not to do with work, and I'll be like, what's your favorite 80s song, and make a playlist so everyone can, or what's your least favorite vegetable or something, because then there's actually a way of human connection versus, oh crap, is Jonti the person I go to about this, or like it just becomes, this is Jonti, this is V, and we both love Brussels sprouts, we're best friends now.
And of course, you get bonus points if the favourite 80s song and the least favourite vegetable are the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. See?
It's beets.
Very nice, everybody. Oh, go ahead.
My least favorite vegetable is beets.
Oh, well, we're not going to bond. I love beets.
I still don't understand people putting them on beef burgers here, though. That makes my head hurt.
Australian cuisine, man. All right. I guess I also wanted to bring in the concept of mentors a little bit into this, because often we talk about networks and mentors as kind of interchangeable things, but they're not exactly the same thing. So I was hoping I could get thoughts from everyone on what's the difference, what's the specific role of mentors, how do you find new ones, things like that.
So I would say, you know, mentors, are a specific part of your networks. Right? So mentors are really, their role is to advise and to support. It is similar to a network, but a network, I would say, is people that give and take, that you give and take from. Right? It's a broader thing than the simple mentor-mentee relationship, and the mentor-mentee relationship is often stronger and deeper, whereas a network can be a bit more shallow. You may have different levels within that, and I think it's important to have both. Your mentor will have a deeper knowledge of maybe your situation and advice on your situation, but if you have a network, you have you have a broader set of ideas to pick from and experiences to draw from.
Yeah, I think the lines do get quite blurred as well. So, I mean, different people fill different roles for you in different circumstances. So, I've got colleagues who are good friends, they're collaborators, but also at times they're mentors for specific things. So, for example, Rob, who I work with, who I know Sarah knows quite well because she was in an office near him for a couple of years, is a good mate of mine and we work together on a lot of stuff. But if I'm grant writing, he's been successful in writing grants, so he's a very good person to go to as a mentor and say, am I getting this right? Equally, he'll come to me and I'll be a mentor if he's doing some outreach stuff because he hates that and I do a lot of it. So people don't necessarily just fall into a fixed pigeonhole for you and that's it. From my point of view, the other thing that I've benefited from hugely in my career, and I hope I pay back to the people I work with, is mentors advocating for you without you necessarily realizing that that's happening. So I've had a slightly unusual career path in that I do my work in a discipline that's so small that I've often been the only person in the country doing it, never mind the only person at my institution. And my first postdoc came because kind of a mentorship role. I shared an office with a Swiss PhD student, and I was looking for jobs and struggling because even 16 years ago, the job market was unpleasant. And she said, oh, by the way, the place I did my master's as a student, they tried to hire someone and they didn't fill the role, so they're advertising, so word of mouth. And then my second postdoc came because people I'd worked with during my undergrad, I had a summer project. The person who was to become a great mentor and supporter of mine, Barry Jones, was looking for someone to do a specific role and didn't have a clue who to get because it was really unusual. And he spoke to someone I'd worked with and they said, have you thought of talking to Jonti? He'd be ideal. So in neither of those cases, certainly in the second case where I got the role at the OU, I wasn't out there advocating for myself. I didn't know this position was coming up. I didn't know that Mark was advocating on my behalf, but in retrospect, that was an exactly prime example of how a mentor works. And equally, my position up at USQ was partially Rob. USQ were looking for someone to start within 2 weeks because they needed someone in before a certain deadline. I was working for UNSW totally unpaid because that's a whole other story of trauma and woe. And they approached Rob and Rob wasn't free, but he said, look, Jonti's looking for a job and it'd be a perfect fit. So your mentors can be friends. They should be friends. They should be people you get on really well with, but they will be supporting you behind the scenes without you realizing it. And if they're not, I'd be gobsmacked, to be honest. So I just wanted to give my story of it to see where mentorship's helpful and how I never picked any of those people. They're just people I worked with and got on well with and they were senior. It wasn't like I went to them and said, please, will you be my mentor? I will pay you $15 mentor dollars per minute or whatever. It just happened, but they were pivotal in helping me get where I am. And it's a story of luck rather than judgment. I'm here purely because I was lucky, not because I was good. And part of that luck was having the good fortune to be supported by good mentors.
And I think, when you blur that line between, mentors and networks, and I think everybody will have a different definition of it, because I would say, Jonti, your examples were networks rather than mentors, because a mentor would have told you about it, for example. But it doesn't really matter. I think it's the functions that they play for you, and the importance of making sure you have different people within your network at all those sort of different levels, so that you have people that would advocate for you if the opportunity came up, and that you would advocate for in return. that you would have people that you could go to specifically for advice and that sort of understand your pathway, who might be closer to a mentor sort of position or role for you.
When we hire new faculty now, we actually appoint a mentor for everybody coming in. I think it's great to, you find mentors yourself, obviously, but I think it's really useful to have a person that you know is your mentor when you go to a new place. And I think it really helps that you don't feel alone and that there's someone you can talk to right away.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these threads connect, right? So this networking as a way to actually like know people as people, and mentoring as a way to make sure that everyone kind of sees the ecosystem and is able to find a good niche in there. Yeah, this all sounds really good stuff. I guess there's one other topic that sort of came up and then we didn't get back to it, which is that we're not all exactly working from home right now. It's more that we're living at work. And how, if we're all trying to be connected all the time and be available and all of that, how do we create and defend boundaries between work time and personal time? What's your experience been?
To find an answer to that, let me though, look, this is something I struggle with because I was and not being in a research role, when I was in the office I could be very clear, these are my hours, and I have young children as well, so that also helps because I don't have a choice a lot of the time. These are my hours, I have to go pick up the kids from XYZ or they're going to be jumping all over me, and so I won't be able to work. But through COVID, my kids have been jumping over me a lot. They're not here today, but they have been. So that's not an excuse to break from work anymore. And because I'm sitting in my home office, I just keep working and working and working. And oh, it's 6 o'clock. Kids, because I've just closed my door and my husband takes care of the kids or whatever it might be. So it is a lot harder. I really like Jonti's idea before of keeping track of your hours, because it keeps you accountable, and you can sort of set, right, well, that is too much or that is too little or whatever it might be. I still, even though I can sort of close my door and have the kids not distract me too much or get used to having them around, I do generally say, right, this is the hard end for me because I need to cook dinner or I need to put them to bed or whatever it might be. But it's having a time that's accountable, that you can be held accountable to say, right, I need to log off now and I need to step away from my workspace and then not come back to that workspace. So it helps to have a corner that is your office corner rather than just have it at the dining table, right? And not everybody has that luxury, but if you can just even say this 1 square meter is my workspace and I don't do anything else there, that I find really helps.
Yeah, and Natalia is backing you up in the chat here that different places are for different functions and you can sort of operant condition yourself into doing different things in different places. Yeah.
Yeah, some things that our candidates have been doing is sort of wearing a watch when it's work time, wearing shoes when it's work time, getting dressed for study or work, and then getting redressed for home time. Something I do is that in my team, I'm quite strict that we all have to stand up and go for at least a 20-minute walk at the end of the day. And then when we come back through the front door, if we're allowed to leave the house, I'm sorry, Jeffrey, for leaning that onto you too at the moment, but maybe you can go into one door and not go back, as Mita was suggesting before. Leave that zone in a certain place. Doing anything that, even doing a meditation or doing some yoga or calling a friend at a regular time, or a family member at each day, builds in a ritual and a routine. So when I'm working, I always have classical music playing, and when that's off and I bring the disco on, I know that it's the end of the day. But sometimes for me, as my days just blur, I'm playing, you know, classical music till 11 p.m. So I'm not always perfect, but I think it's just striving to find a balance and a rhythm is really important, because at this stage in Australia, we're hearing that this is a long game, and us taking care of ourselves and each other through not just the sector collapsing, but through our healthcare system being overrun and our communities being greatly impacted, that looking after ourselves and each other is the work this year. There is no research without researchers. And so it's really important that we do whatever it takes to be as well as we can.
Yeah, I'd utterly support that. I think that's a really important message. And I think one of the things we need to get out to all our colleagues is the whole "are you okay" thing. We need to look out for each other. It's a lot harder when we're on here. And ensuring that the work-life balance is balanced is a real challenge. I'm terrible at it. You know, I'm utterly awful at it because, you know, I always have the thing of I've got so many other things I need to do today. You almost get decision paralysis and you end up going too long. But if you can look at those around you, look after those around you, that's really important right now. And you work more effectively if you're happy and healthy and well, and your team will do as well. So I know it's hard sometimes to consider mental health and stuff, but it's so critical and it's a really important issue. I just want to flag up, actually, in terms of networking and getting to know people and stuff, in meetings like this, don't feel that you can't say anything, don't feel you have to hide. So I know Natalie has been really active in chat as a really good example. Here's someone who's building a network as we speak. You know, that's what you do. And it's hard at first, but if you've got a relaxed environment and supportive environment, everybody chipping in is how it works. It's just like in person. If you have a gossip, if you have a chat. So throwing things into the chat, even if they're, you know, not too serious, if they're dead serious, whatever, that's really important. That's really helpful. And that's why you're here. You know, so just be active, engage, and everybody wants to hear from you, I think.
All right, so I guess it is time to wrap up. Thank you all so much for your time here and for agreeing to come and share your experiences and your insights. I'd like to ask if you have anything you'd like to advertise, if you have any things about yourself that we can, you want people to come and see about you. Go ahead and tell everybody while you've got the floor.
No, people are welcome to join me at Shut Up and Write. I have to leave right now and start that, so you're welcome to keep chatting there. But also, and
the link for that is up at the top of the chat, so people can just hop right over there if they want to.
Yeah, people have come in. But also, yeah, let's hang out on Twitter. Ingra and I teach a social media for researchers course, so if you've got any questions about that, happy to talk about the private and the public now that we're absolutely living at work. I'm going to use that phrase. Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, just power on. Take care of yourselves. Keep your spirits as high as you can. Just seek joy and health. But it was wonderful to meet you all. Yeah, take care.
Thanks so much. All right,
nice
Geoff, closing thoughts?
I'm going to go to bed.
That seems like a good choice. Thanks for staying up late for us. Mita, closing thoughts?
Look, I was just saying in the chat, I really do like that, the last thing that Jonti said. You know, we're in a strange environment. There's lots of things that we need to get used to. Finding the little ways of making sure that you're still visible and this sort of thing is really important. So asking questions in this sort of environment, really important. Because even if we're not seeing your faces, we're seeing your names pop up. And then next time I, you know, come across you, I'll go, oh yeah, they know that person. I had lots of really interesting things to say and things to ask. So yeah, I'd encourage people to not really push yourself too hard, because this is a stressful environment for everybody. And to be honest, networking is not at the top of my priority list, but find the little ways of, you know, being able to keep a base level of activity up. And they can be little ways. So, yeah.
All right. So before everybody goes, I'd just like to advertise that next week we're doing this again, same time, possibly same Zoom link. And the topic it'll be a panel on academic jobs. So get your questions together and come on back next week and we'll have another good conversation. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.